Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and we're discussing the big story today, which is, of course, the Narendra Modi-Vladimir Putin summit. The first time this is happening in 2 years. It's an annual summit. And we have a stellar guest platform here with us. Joining us from Bangalore is Ambassador P.S. Raghavan. He's been India's former chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, as well as a former envoy to Russia. Ambassador, good to see you, sir.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you again.
And from Moscow, we're joined by two very special guests who've been on our platform before, but let me introduce them again. Dr. Dmitri Trenin, who is the director of the Carnegie Center in Moscow. Good evening, Dr. Trenin.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Pleasure, sir. And we have Dr. Anna Kireeva, who joins us. She's an associate professor at MGIMO. Thank you, Dr. Kireeva.
It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Ambassador is still waiting for the joint statement and, of course, the Foreign Secretary's briefing, but we do know the issues that have been discussed. In a very short time, a lot of meetings, Ambassador.
Absolutely. I think that was the intention. To start with, I think the symbolism is very, very strong. We needed to correct some of the negative narratives of the past year when the postponement of the summit caused all kinds of speculations. And then there were statements by various people on various subjects, which seemed to indicate that India and Russia are drifting apart. And I think this symbolism of President Putin coming to India as only the second visit abroad, physical visit abroad after the one to Geneva in June, I think it has a very strong demonstrative impact. And then you see what is really striking, the focused intensity of the interaction today, starting from the defense ministers meeting and then the military technical commission, joint commission meeting, the agreements that were signed, followed by the external affairs ministers meeting each other, the 2+2 of foreign and defense ministers, which is really a very significant initiative in order to get the strategic compass of the relationship set in a way. And then, of course, you have economics, you have energy, you have technology. I think there is a very vast canvas which has been covered in a very short period of time, which is also meant, besides showing the robustness of the relationship, it actually does further the robustness of the relationship. And then, of course, you have the summit meeting, which has started and which will probably go on for much longer than scheduled. It speaks to the rapport between the two leaders. I've been there the first time these leaders met in 2014. I was present. In these 7 years, they have really built a very strong rapport. And all of this, I think, will set right the narratives and set us forward also in terms of a strategic platform for future engagement.
Dr. Trenin, setting the narrative right, resetting the compass, recalibrating. You've written on it very recently also about a rethink, reassessment of strategic ties.
Well, I think that's precisely the opportunity for the Prime Minister and the President to start an upgrade of the relationship. The relationship is officially characterized as a privileged strategic partnership. I think it has to live up fully to that, very high-sounding description. And above all, I think the economic foundation of the relationship needs to be strengthened beyond what it is today. There are projects where Indians and Russians are successfully collaborating, but we still realize that the trade volume between India and Russia has been stagnating, and it cannot be actually compared to the trade volumes with that India has with such countries as the United States and China, despite the very rocky relationship between New Delhi and Beijing. So I think that it would be absolutely crucial for the two countries not just to continue the relationship in the areas where they have been scoring successes after successes over the last several decades, but to explore first and then exploit new areas of collaboration, primarily, as I said, in the economic and technological domain. I think the fact that India has been rising very robustly, both economically and technologically, has not been fully comprehended by a lot of people in Russia. And by the same token, Russia remains in many ways a terra incognita for many people in the Indian business community. So an effort must be made to bring the economic agents in both countries closer together, but they can only come together if they will be if they're informed that it's worth looking in that direction. And I think, as I said, exploring new areas before they can be exploited could be the way to go for the relationship.
I think, Amitabh, you're muted.
Yeah, Dr. Kireeva, just asking you, I'm sorry for that. Just asking you about the message that President Putin is sending. Dr. Trenin was mentioning that, the rise of India may not be so succinctly understood in Russia by many, but it's certainly understood by President Putin and the strategic community. His first bilateral visit abroad after the pandemic is to India. I mean, you're not counting Geneva because that was a third country.
Yeah, of course. And I guess that the understanding that India's rise offers huge opportunities for Russia, it's more than just with the President Putin himself. I think it is now gaining more and more prominence generally, not only in Russia's policy and economic elite, but also in just in the Russian society, in the Russian with the Russian public. And probably I would also highlight that we have seen the 2+2 meeting between the foreign and defense ministers, which is very important in terms of deeper understanding of each other and of each other concerns. In the recent years, regional environment in the Indo-Pacific has really shifted dramatically. And Russia-India strategic partnership is, of course, a very time-tested partnership. But as the regional environment and regional dynamics have really become somewhat altered, there is a great need to address them and to find kind of anew to revitalize our strategic partnership against this changing background. So I guess for this very idea, the visit has been of utmost importance. And I would probably point out to one of the agreements that has been signed between the ministers of defense of the two countries that highlights different kind of security and military activities between the two states up to 2030. So for the next decade, I think that's a very good illustration that the two countries really would love to move forward with this strategic dimension as well here. However, I would really do support Professor Trenin with the saying that on the economic front, there is really a lot of potential that we should move forward. And especially, I think it was a groundbreaking visit by Prime Minister Modi to the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok 2019, September, which actually has the potential to lay the foundation for a qualitatively new economic interaction in the Far East, but also generally between Russia and India. And I guess looking forward to having more joint investment, also to having more joint ventures, new value chains, also in such spheres as medicine, IT, and also trying to operationalize how Vladivostok-Chennai maritime trade route could work is something that has a great potential and is really of utmost importance to our countries.
Ambassador, Dr. Kireeva was talking about the defense relationship being extended to signing for another decade. Now, the S-400 is a big ticket deal between India and Russia, not just between our two countries, but with CAATSA looming as well. And we've talked about this before, about India exercising its sovereign rights despite the potential threat of sanctions.
Yes, I think that is most evident by the fact that S-400 is coming, S-400 is being operationalized. But as I have said before on one of your earlier shows, I think besides the demonstration of strategic autonomy to import our weapons from wherever we want, it's a weapon system which is required by us. It's also the logic of the kind of cooperation we've had with Russia over the last many decades, that this and other future weapon systems are natural fits with our armed forces. Now, this is something that we have explained to our American friends. We see, at least I sense, a greater understanding in our American friends after the Biden administration has taken over. And there is talk in various quarters in America of the CAATSA being waived, either specifically or generally. There are a variety of ideas which are on the table. But the point is, we cannot wait on that. We need S-400, we need the defense cooperation for various reasons. We will go ahead with that. And we will have to find a way of keeping that going alongside the relations with the US, which are also of great importance to us. And as we have said before, we have diversified our defense acquisitions. We also don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, which is the Russian basket. But at the same time, we want to do it at our pace, and we want to take advantage of technologies that Russia is giving us, which nobody else is giving us, so that our defense requirements are met. And the other point I want to mention also very quickly, Russia also has bought into our Atmanirbhar Make in India policies. So the technologies are also transferred to enable India to manufacture in India, which is something which is Prime Minister Modi's one of Prime Minister Modi's biggest ambitions, is to make sure that the defense industry in India grows. And there again, we have a good partner in Russia.
Ambassador, and we've talked about this before, Varun Pratap raising the question of sanctions on future defense deals, and you've given different options. I could come to that, but Dr. Trenin, just coming to you on the S-400s, how important is the S-400 deal with India to the Russian military-industrial complex?
Well, I think it's an important deal in the sense that a major country such as India trusts that kind of Russian advanced military technology. I think it helps Russian defense exports. It certainly enhances their prestige. So there are a number of countries around Asia, and starting with Turkey and India and China, that have purchased those systems. And those are the countries that today are among the most, let's say, active on the regional and global scene. So that, I think, is important. But times have changed since the 1990s and the early 2000s, when the Russian defense industry lived off primarily its exports. The Russian government is purchasing a big number of various defense systems for the armed forces modernization, and the Russian defense industry does not depend the way it used to depend on foreign exports. So it's very good for prestige. It's good because India is paying It's good because others are watching what India and some other countries are purchasing. So that's a good thing. Absolutely.
Dr. Kireeva, if you want to add anything on how India is reorienting, I mean, there are lots of figures, CIPRI, where the dependence on Russian armaments has gone down. There is diversification. There's Atmanirbhar, which is Make in India as well, which Russia is, of course, helping us. Your thoughts on that, Dr. Kireeva?
Of course, we can see that there is a diversification to a much greater extent that it used to be previously. However, I would say that defense cooperation between Russia and India is at a very high, a very deep level, maybe level which has been unprecedented for both countries. And for Russia specifically, this is the level where we have joint development and joint production of specific military equipment. BrahMos missiles, also we have a project on 5th generation fighter jet. As far as I understand, there is also a new project on rifles and firearms. So this is kind of joint production, which is really, it requires a deep level of trust. And I guess if we have this kind of deep level of trust between security ministries, between our militaries, it means that it represents the deep strategic level of our engagement as well. So I guess this is really very important. Of course, as India has been developing, as many other states, it's quite natural that India would like to gain more of its own military-industrial complex and to develop its own military-industrial complex. And here, I guess, cooperation with Russia is also very helpful. And something like joint projects, I think, is a huge way forward and also a way for Russian-India relations to stay back here. And also for Russia, maintaining all the systems that Russia previously sold to India, it's also very important for the Russian military and for the Russian military-industrial complex as well. So it's kind of a long-term partnership. It's not that you just sell and you forget about that. So I guess it's also helping.
In terms of joint production, technology transfer, it may not be such high level, Ambassador, in terms of S-400s, but finally the AK-203 Kalashnikov deal has been signed for co-production in Amethi for over 6 lakh rifles that the Indian military needs desperately to replace the INSAS. How important are deals like that, and why do they take so long, Ambassador?
Why they take so long is a difficult question to answer. There are procedures which I think you know about as well. I would say that they're being short-circuited now, and the time frame for between decision and action has reduced considerably in the last few years. That is one thing. But actually, the S-400, of course, is a pure military sale project. It is not a transfer of technology project. But there are a number of others. You see, one of the problems with India-Russia defense collaboration and the public recognition of the India-Russia defense collaboration is that so much of it is sensitive and secret. A whole lot of things are under development. A whole lot of technologies are under discussion. But much of it does not come into the public domain, or does not come into the public domain until it reaches a very advanced stage. So there is a lot of discussion about joint production, joint research, joint development. Now, assault rifles are one of the less sensitive aspects of cooperation, and therefore it is in the public domain. We need to keep that in mind, that there are many other projects which are sensitive and therefore not in the public domain. But the fact remains, as I said earlier, and as ambassador in Moscow, I have been involved in many of these very sensitive deals. I can tell you that the level of technologies that we are getting from Russia exceeds anything that we are getting from anywhere else because of various reasons. But the fact remains that that is so.
Another issue that, in fact, Sergey Lavrov brought up, Dr. Trenin, and I'm going to take a couple of questions and comments here. One from Omar Datpe, who says, how do you see Foreign Minister Lavrov's statements on the non-inclusive nature of AUKUS and India's Indo-Pacific strategy? And Bruce Wayne, who asks, why is Russia fixated on Asia Pacific instead of the Indo-Pacific?
Well, let me take the second question first and the first question last. I think there's a little bit of, how shall I put it, superficiality in juxtaposing Indo-Pacific versus Asia-Pacific. Asia-Pacific was a bona fide term that was used in the United States for decades. I think it was imported into Soviet political language by Gorbachev in the mid to late 1980s. For Russia, that or the Soviet Union in those days, that was an extension of its vision beyond the shoreline of Asia to include the Pacific into the traditional discussion of Asian issues. The United States has come up with the idea of Indo-Pacific very recently. And let's be blunt about that. It came up with that in the context of the sharpening, intensifying confrontation between Washington and Beijing. So for the United States, this is primarily, as I see it, a strategic concept that has primarily geopolitical and military security aspects. There are other aspects involved, but those two are of prime importance. My own view is that there's a bit of confusion in some heads in Moscow when they just look at similar sounding concepts advanced by such countries as the United States, Japan, and India, and basically focus their criticism on the concept without specifying that it's the U.S. concept that they are criticizing. There's a lot, I'm sure, in the Indo-Pacific concept advanced by India that, from the Russian perspective, is not big issue or is actually fits within the broader Russian strategic view. There's another aspect to that. Asia-Pacific is essentially, from the Russian perspective, it's essentially continental concept, or a concept of basically continental vision, whereas Indo-Pacific is clearly a maritime concept, which is more traditional for countries such as the United States and other maritime powers. I think for India, it basically means extending its look east policy to include the Pacific region as well. So I think that the more Indians and Russians talk in detail about the Indian concept of Indo-Pacific and the Russian concept of the Grand Eurasian Partnership, the more they will realize that there's much more in those contexts. Actually, that the concepts can be seen as complementary. I do not see them as being at odds with each other.
Dr. Kireeva, is there more understanding on the complementarity in terms of the Russian Asia-Pacific view and the Indian Indo-Pacific view vis-a-vis the American one, which of course both India and Russia are saying that you're not following?
Sure. I guess when Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs criticizes the Indo-Pacific, they actually mostly refer to the American version. Kind of unfortunately, it has been rather fixated on the American version as late. However, if we look at Russia's understanding of the region, of broad Asia or the Indo-Pacific, and on the Indian Indo-Pacific vision, we could see that there are many things that Russia and India share in common. And also, I should say there is a great convergence between Russia and ASEAN as well. These are visions which are more inclusive, I guess, which would like to see the regional order actually not bipolar, but kind of more polycentric one with different centers of power. And not actually excluding everyone. I guess for Russia, this is the painful lessons of the Cold War and the painful lessons of having NATO in Europe. So the Russian foreign policy officials look at such kind of alliances, and probably they're concerned that such kind of alliances could also be formed in Asia as well. So I guess this is kind of a concern. It has not materialized yet, fortunately, and this is probably also the reason why Russia doesn't really feel well about AUKUS as well, as it sees its different dimensions, especially the acquisition of the nuclear powered submarines by Australia as something that could be a kind of a stepping stone for forming new alliances in Asia. And if there are just new alliances, if there are really very strong, rigid dividing lines, it will mean that all the countries, if there's some kind of rigid bipolar order in Asia and in the Indo-Pacific in future, it will mean that all the countries will have to pick a side, to choose a side. So for sure, Russia would not. It's quite obvious which side Russia would choose in this regard, and it's quite obvious which side India would choose. So, but it's not something that is perceived to be in Russia's interests as well. Russia is not really interested in joining a full-fledged military alliance with China, and probably in future, if such an alliance emerges, Russia's positions would be more subordinate, and Russia for sure would not like to have that. Russia still perceives itself to be as a great power, and it would like to retain as much strategic autonomy as possible and to retain as much foreign policy choice as possible. And here, I guess, India and ASEAN and other players in the region come in because it's very important for Russia also to have robust strategigic partnership with them as well. And I guess Russia-India partnership is something that keeps the region more in this sense of not falling into the trap of a rigid bipolar order. And this is something that promotes polycentric regional order. There was a press conference by Lavrov just a couple of hours ago, and I think that he spoke that Russia and India both support ASEAN centrality. And again, this is something we have in common with ASEAN as well. More inclusive, more cooperative regional architecture is something that we would like to see more.
Dr. Kireeva, I know you have to go for your classes, so a quick comment on how you see the Russia-China relationship and the India-US relationship before you go.
Currently, Russia-China relationship is, also a strategic partnership, I think, in a kind of deep alignment. We can say that this is really a deep alignment in the form of strategic partnership. This is not a military alliance, as there is no obligation of between the two sides to defend each other. This strategic partnership is formed around an area of interests. I would probably say that securing the border, peace and stability at the Russia-China border is very important. Also creating a multipolar world or a polycentric world here, opposing American hegemony. Also a threat from American alliances, both for Russia in the West and for China in Asia. This is something that we do share in common. However, at the same time, again, it's not an alliance, and Russia and China do not actually support each other in different issues, and they for sure, Russia and China they try to minimize the differences, try to not oppose each other, but retain strategic neutrality in the conflicts where two of them are actually involved in. So, for example, Russia retains neutrality on the South China Sea, on the East China Sea, and other conflicts, and also tries to act as a bridge, as an kind of intermediary between China and India, and help them mitigate the border dispute. So here, I would probably say that on Russia-China.
Right, Dr. Kireeva, I know you have to travel to your classes, so I would love to continue with you, but maybe next time. Thank you for joining us. I'll get and it's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dr. Trenin, your quick comments on, I mean, you've spoken before also, even during the height of Galwan, where Russia helped India with the armaments when our defense minister went to Moscow and asked for them. So it may be neutrality, but that doesn't stop Russia from doing what's in its interest vis-a-vis India, right?
Well, Russia is a great power, and great powers act out of their interest and out of their conviction. They do not bend, they do not bow to other people's, other countries' demands or requests. Absolutely. And I think that Russia has been very open and very transparent about that. It has a relationship with China, which is very important for Russia, but that relationship should not get in the way of the relationship with India and vice versa. So that's, but Russia sees both countries, India and China, as its major strategic partners in Asia, but also more broadly on the global scale. And it wants to stay in that equilibrium within RIC and BRICS and SCO and other formats, also on the bilateral level. And I hope that Chinese friends will recognize that, will always recognize it. We do recognize it now, and they have to put up with that if they must. But that's the golden rule of Russia's foreign policy. Thank you.
We're seeing defense systems that have gone to India and China. Dr. Trenin, appreciate you staying a little bit beyond your deadline. Thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure, Dr. Trenin. Again,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ambassador, just keeping you on for a short while longer, just trying to get a sense of whether we'll get comments. As you're saying, it'll probably be postponed. But till then, just some questions for you. Just let me find them. Yeah, Sarkis asks you, Ambassador, how is the special and privileged partnership with Russia different from the comprehensive strategic partnership with the US? What does Russia's partnership include that makes it privileged?
We should not discuss or argue about adjectives. Essentially, both are important strategic partnerships. Both, they cannot be compared with each other. They both have a different character. They both have a different DNA. Both are extremely important for us in different areas. The US relationship grew very strongly after 2000, and particularly after 2008, when the Indo-US nuclear deal took place. And because of the nuclear deal, the US actually worked to remove India from what you might call the nuclear apartheid, which India was faced with earlier, because of which India now, civil nuclear cooperation is open for India. And it also dismantled progressively the technology denial regimes against India. And this was actually the US which was at the forefront of this effort. It also enabled us, therefore, to diversify our relations, including our defense partnership. And that is the reason why today you are importing 49% of your equipment from Russia over the past 5 years, whereas earlier, a few years ago, it was 80%. So you have a relationship with the US which spans a number of areas: trade, investment, technology, the diaspora, education. Many of these are not part of the India-Russia relationship. India-Russia relationship has defense, it has energy, it has natural resources, raw material, and it should have economic cooperation. The problem is that it is a bit stunted today because of lack of awareness, but also because people don't recognize the huge freight times and freight charges when you're traveling halfway around the world to reach the port of St. Petersburg. If we can activate the North-South Transport Corridor and the multimodal link via Iran, it not only helps us with Afghanistan, it not only helps us with Central Asia, it can raise India-Russia trade by manifold in a year's time. So both are very important relationships. And let me come back to what, actually in elaboration of what Dr. Trenin said about the Indo-Pacific. See, the Indo-Pacific, as he rightly pointed out, is a maritime concept. Now, India is both a maritime and a continental power. And our problems with China are at the moment in the continental domain, though potentially in the maritime domain. So, we have to actually, the relationship with the US has helped us a lot in building our maritime capabilities. The Quad and Malabar and so on are meant also for the US to bolster our position vis-a-vis China in the maritime domain. So that's another aspect of the US relationship. On the continental domain, there is a completely different challenge. You have Central Asia, which is wedged between Russia and China. We need to be present there. We need to be engaged with Russia in order to see that our interests are protected. That's another aspect. So you can say that the continental domain is an area where our India-Russia relations come into their own. And along with all other aspects of the Indo-US relationship, the maritime domain is a part of our US relationship. That is a long answer to a short question. I think you're muted again.
I think before I get to energy, which I want you to elaborate a little bit more, and trade, there's another question on defense. BrahMos, S-400s, Omkar Dape saying, can we see a joint venture on development of a hypersonic missile?
There is some joint research work done in various areas. And as I said before, part of the problem with India-Russia defense collaboration is that they cover sensitive technologies and you do not want to make them public until they reach a certain level. So I don't want to comment on individual technologies, but let me just say that Russia is open to collaboration in a much wider range of technologies than many other countries are.
Some more questions I'm just going to take while we're getting a sense of whether Foreign Secretary Shringla is going to speak anytime soon, because we want to bring that to you live as well. Ambassador, there is a sense among some Indian quarters, like Dinesh Kumar says, I won't use the word blackmail, but Russia is blackmailing India by tilting towards Pakistan and favoring China instead of being neutral on the issue. Your comments?
Well, this concept of blackmail, I don't know where it comes from. We were talking earlier on in this conversation itself about when we, at the height of our China tensions, when our defense minister went to Moscow, the Russians very clearly told us that they will be continuing military supplies to India, including fast-tracking some if required. There were murmurs from China saying that, look, when one of your strategic partners is working with another, has a conflict or tensions with another, you should not be supplying weapons. Russia ignored that and continuing supplying that. And I think that the S-400 deliveries now, President Putin's coming here now as for the first physical bilateral visit, as you said. All of this is a very clear indication in which Russia wants to show that it values its relations with India. Pakistan is a different context altogether. You see, we don't have an exclusivity with relations with any country. So it's not a question of blackmail. Russia could equally say that, when you are diversifying your relationship with US, Europe, and other countries of the world, we also want to have a broader range of international relationship. Where it will become blackmail, if it ever comes to that, is if these relations threaten to conflict with your national interests. Now, there is no indication that is so as yet. Again, I would remind you, you may say whatever they did with Pakistan in the context of the Taliban, in the context of Afghanistan, when Pakistan went to them and said, you support us in the United Nations about India's abrogation of Article 370 and changing the status of Jammu and Kashmir, Russia put out a public statement saying that this is an internal affair of India. And it said that we have advised the Pakistani foreign minister that this is an internal affair of India, and therefore they resisted both Chinese and Pakistani pressure in the United Nations to not take up the issue. So, actually that is the test of a relationship. When things come to a crunch, when important issues are involved, if they support you, you can say that it is a strategic partnership. Differences, there will be. Differences of approach, there will be. There were differences of approach in the way they dealt with the Taliban before the international troops withdrew from Afghanistan. It's bound to happen. We have voted also in various United Nations resolutions in a manner that Russia has not been fully happy with. That will also happen because we are also balancing a number of relationships. The crux of the matter is when your core national interests are involved, if a country does not stand by you, then you will reassess your strategic partnership, whichever the country is.
And you've answered this question partially, Ambassador Swarup. The best saying is Russia supporting India in at the world stage, the UNSC, the way it was. France is supporting us. And I'll just take a quick other question from Ayush Kumar. Can Russia play a pivotal role in India-China de-escalation, especially in Chinese aggression? Well, they played an indirect role, at least we know, because the ministers could talk, had a platform, whether it was the SEO, BRICS, etc., even last year, right?
Yeah, well, Russia offered its territory and its facilitation for the Indian and Chinese, both foreign ministers as well as the defense ministers, to meet at different points of time because there were multilateral meetings on Russian territory. At the same time, I don't think Russia has a role in mediating in any way between India and China. I don't think either India or China want such mediation, and I don't think Russia has any illusions that it can play such a mediatory role between India and China. So, they would like us to settle our issues. They would not like to have to choose between India and Russia in any India and China in any hard sense. But, this is a fact of if you have a conflict with an adversary, let me tell you very clearly, no friend of yours is going to come to your assistance. Because no friend of yours would want to jeopardize his own security in order to get involved in your fight with the adversary. And you've seen this in the past. What will happen is people may support you in the background. They may support you with intelligence. They may support you with advice. But eventually they will put out a public statement asking both sides to exercise restraint and asking both sides to not escalate the situation. So we have to be very clear in our minds as to what we can expect in terms of support if we have a conflict with any adversary. We are on our own and we have to strengthen our own position. We need to make sure that we can stand against an adversary on our own.
Similarly, I mean, just the foot being on the other foot, the boot being on the other foot, Swarup the best. India should engage with Ukraine. What should India be doing? I mean, at the UNSC, we saw Ukraine-sponsored Crimean resolution, which India did not support, even going back to 2014. So how does India deal with either the Ukraine situation or the Belarus situation?
No, you see, let me first say, talking about India should engage with Ukraine. The gentleman probably does not know India does engage with Ukraine.
Absolutely.
Actually, there are some very critical defense components that are being manufactured in Ukraine. Ukraine was, in fact, even during the Soviet times, a thriving center for military industrial production. So whether you're talking about turbines for ships and submarines, whether you're talking about aircraft engines, whether you're talking about major subsystems of missile systems, many of them are manufactured in Ukraine. It's only after the tensions between Russia and Ukraine that Russia tried to sort of take over the production of many of these systems in Russia. But even now, actually, some military items go into Russia via third countries. So anyway, coming back to this, India does have a good relationship with Ukraine. We still have a defense cooperation with Ukraine. What your guest is actually asking is, should India support Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine? Now, why do you want to jeopardize it? You said it's the other side of the same coin. Why do you want to jeopardize an existing relationship in order to get involved in his dispute with another country? Now, there are many aspects to the Russia-Ukraine standoff. And very many countries are involved in this. Europe is involved in this. The US is involved in this. You see, even last month, there were a number of interactions between the US and Russia to see how they can diffuse the crisis with Ukraine. It's a very complex situation. And by the way, when we talk about this situation, we are basing ourselves on a few reports that we get in India, there are always two sides to every question. And we need to understand both the sides to a question to see why this question, this Russia-Ukraine tension has started. The genesis goes back to 2008, when the NATO decided that they will set in motion a process to admit Ukraine to NATO. So it's a long and very complex issue. And we should not get involved in issues that we, firstly, are not fully au fait with, and secondly, where we cannot really play a role in diffusing tensions.
You mentioned earlier both the North-South Corridor and the Vladivostok-Chennai, how important that is. And it's been 2 years since they announced the shift, upping the momentum in that. How important is that, and how long will that take to actually fructify?
Okay, they're two separate questions, but
Absolutely.
Look at this. You look at the Vladivostok, the Act Far East initiative, and Prime Minister Modi's extension, the announcement of a $1 billion line of credit to develop projects in the Russian Far East. One forgets that between then and now, there is one little obstacle called COVID-19, which actually disrupted things all over the world. Now, secondly, it is an out-of-the-box initiative. You announce a line of credit to a country which has never been done before, to a region which has never been done before. So modalities had to be worked out, projects had to be identified, the feasibility of these projects had to be established. All of this, I would say, has been done in super quick time. And we are now in a position, and the External Affairs Minister announced in Moscow a few months ago, that we are on the verge of a couple of agreements being signed to develop that. So I would say this is not foot dragging, this is super fast work. And if we actually do get it, and these are investment projects in natural resources, raw materials, hydrocarbons, all of which the Russian Far East is rich in, and which we actually need. And in doing so, we are also activating the corridor, the Chennai. By the way, the corridor has already, in a sense, been activated. We got our first supply of LNG from the Yamal project in the Arctic, across the Northern Sea route, through the Pacific into the Indian Ocean. So, we have already activated an Indo-Pacific corridor. So things have moved faster than people think they have, and in spite of COVID. The other side, in spite of COVID.
Go ahead, Ambassador. Sorry.
The other side is the North-South Transport Corridor. You see, people don't recognize, people talk about the North-South Transport Corridor as a link to Afghanistan, which is absolutely true and which is very important. It is also a link to Central Asia, which is equally important from a strategic perspective. Remember what I said about the continental dimension of India's foreign policy. But going beyond that, dry runs have shown that you can take this route to Russia and cutting the freight by half and cutting transit times by half. You can imagine this $10 billion trade can increase manifold in a year if you can really activate it. Now, what has stopped it? Again, it is not only foot dragging by India, Iran, and Russia. They're three great bureaucracies of the world, admitted, but also the fact of the sanctions. 2015, brought the prospect of sanctions being lifted on Iran, and then the Trump administration reimposed sanctions. So we got into this various messy situation, but I think the terminal in Chabahar, of course, has been developed. Now, Chabahar has to be linked also up north to activate this. If this can be activated, it's a truly strategic and economic game changer, which we should be working on, and we really should be putting our best foot forward for promotion of economic relations with Russia, with Central Asia, and with Afghanistan.
Right. I think you're right in terms of the Foreign Secretary briefing happening a little later. So I'll put in one last question and hope it starts before that. Since you talked about Afghanistan, both sides have done that as well. We saw the NSA's meeting, which was extremely important in terms of the countries that came together. Russia and India on Afghanistan. How do you see?
See, one thing to recognize is that Russia and India are looking at Afghanistan from different geographies. And therefore, their priorities, while they may agree on the larger picture, their tactical priorities in the immediate present may vary in different ways. You see, Russia is and the Tajikistan, which is a member of the CSTO, the Russian Central Treaty Organization, has also its own perspective because of ethnic links in Afghanistan. Half the Afghans are Tajiks, or roughly half the Afghans are Tajiks. And Russia was worried when the American troops were there because of its face-off with America that Afghanistan may be used to destabilize Russia through Central Asia. We didn't have any such concerns. Russia now wants to make use of its relations with the Taliban in order to again make sure that it protects itself. So we have to recognize that there are elements of difference in our concerns. However, the larger picture, as Patrushev's visit to India and the Central Asian and Iran dialogue with our NSA showed, the longer term objectives coincide perfectly. So we need to understand where the tactical differences come from and focus on the larger strategic picture where we are on the same plane.
And I think, like you've been pointing out or alluding to, that patience always pays. I think patience has paid a little bit. Master, you can hang on for a little bit because Foreign Secretary Shringla has started speaking, and just go to that live.
Very good.
Just trying to get an audio issue there. Okay, so I've got him open in another window, so I'm trying to listen to it there as well, Ambassador.
Sure.
So Foreign Secretary Shringla is talking about exactly what we did, that after Geneva, the importance that President Putin assigns to the bilateral relationship is shown because he came to India, the first bilateral visit since the pandemic. He's talking about, the highest award that was given to the Prime Minister as well. He's trying to get that audio back as soon as we can. He's talking about how short and how productive the meeting has been. Excellent discussions, he says, between the two leaders. And he's talking about the outcome document, which will be issued shortly. So I guess we'll have to wait for that.
In all, a record number of 28 agreements or MOUs were concluded during this visit. These agreements were both government to government as well as business to business, including involving our public sector units in both countries. The agreements cover a very wide range of sectors, including trade.
I think it's buffering as well. He was just talking about the agreements.
Culture, intellectual property, accountancy, cyber attacks in the banking sector, manpower, geological exploration, survey, education, etc. India and Russia have also signed a program of cooperation in the field of defense.
It's going at buffering at crucial times, but I think he's talking about 20 agreements.
The diversity of agreements and MOUs signed today shows the multi-factor.
Right, you're just trying to get that. Well, I'll listen to it elsewhere, Ambassador, and just tell you.
Look for what he says about the Russian Far East.
Yeah, he's talking about vaccines and humanitarian assistance currently that was discussed, and the help that both sides had given each other. The medicines we gave to 25 regions and 60 hospitals in Russia, and then how Russia had supported us to fight the second wave of the pandemic. He's talking about the two leaders speaking as well on the pandemic. Okay, so I'll just try and we just play those visuals and see if we can get an audio. I can hear it in my ear as well. I'll tell you, Ambassador, if there's anything on the Far East. But you were talking earlier also about LNG trade and the need to take up trade because that was a potential that was really lagging.
Yes, and there are a number of reasons for it. I mean, one of them I did mention the distance.
We will be sharing the joint statement and the list of agreements concluded with you shortly. The Prime Minister and President Putin held in-depth discussions on strengthening our bilateral and multilateral cooperation in the spirit of our special and privileged strategic partnership. Both leaders noted that the extent of our bilateral cooperation in fighting the COVID pandemic was significant, in particular in the areas of vaccines and humanitarian assistance. It would be recalled that fairly early in the COVID pandemic, India had supplied COVID-related medicines to 25 regions and over 60 hospitals of Russia. In the same spirit of solidarity, Russia supported our efforts to fight the second wave of the pandemic. We'll also recall that President Putin spoke to Prime Minister Modi on the 28th of April this year, after which there was extensive Russian support and solidarity in the form of the supply of concentrators, medicines, and so on and so forth. Prime Minister thanked President Putin for the welfare of the Indian community in Russia, especially during the COVID pandemic, particularly for the 15,000 Indian students resident in Russia. Both leaders discussed the need for mutual recognition of vaccine certification to enable easier travel of our citizens to each other's countries. Enhancing bilateral trade and investments figured prominently in the talks. This year, we have noticed an encouraging trend of growth in our trade compared to last year, when there was a downturn owing to the COVID pandemic. Obviously, I think both sides are looking forward to continued increase.
Right, Master, we keep losing that audio because of buffering problem. But he's highlighting there. I think they said 28 agreements. We'll get the fine print a little later. But if you want to continue with your thoughts on trade.
Yeah. So as I said, one is of course the distance and the problem of connectivity. The other is a problem of awareness. We actually, both India, and this is Dr. Trenin I was talking about, he's written in his blog in the Carnegie Center, he's pointed out the problem of lack of awareness in Russia about the opportunities in India. And I can tell you it is the same lack of awareness in India about the opportunities in Russia. So our banking relations are not so great. In addition, you have the Russians are fixated on India as a country that they helped at a time when the Soviet Union was assisting us economically. That's the mindset that is there. India looks at Russia as a country where you have these outdated Soviet technologies, clunky Soviet technologies. Some of our Indian business people got actually burnt. They got their fingers burnt when they tried to do business in the new Russia in the 1990s, in Yeltsin's Russia in the 1990s. So there is a baggage of the past which is not helping as well. And then you have the sanctions. People don't quite understand what the sanctions mean, how you operate, how circumvent the sanctions. India has taken the stand that they do not recognize the sanctions against Russia because they only recognize sanctions imposed by the UN. At the same time, you don't want to fall foul of the sectoral sanctions, currency sanctions. You don't want your euro or your dollar account to be frozen in Europe and America. You don't want your goods to be confiscated on the way. So, navigating around the sanctions is an art which the Europeans, by the way, have perfected. European trade with Russia, in spite of the fact that Europe has imposed sanctions on Russia, it is growing. But our business has been a little bit more tentative about finding the right ways of doing it. Our public sector has done it. That's why you have these hydrocarbon investments in Russia, quite a large amount and growing. But the private sector has not really found a way to go around sanctions. And that is, again, another reason why the European Eurasian Union, Economic Union is good, because it also links up to Central Asia, which are not governed by Western sanctions. And therefore, you find a route through Central Asia to Russia. So that's another avenue that can be opened, which can promote economic and trade relations. So there are a number of these factors that go into the fact that, Dr. Trenin was talking about, I think he was talking about Russia-China trade turnover being about $100 billion. India-China trade turnover is about $100 billion. So you have a very strange situation where India-Russia trade is about, well, it became $10 or $11 billion, I think partly because of LNG supplies having begun.
Right. I think we're not being able to sort out those issues, but I can hear him talking about maritime security. He's also talked about, our concerns with terrorism, Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba, President Putin confirming our support for, of course, UN expansion. So just, I think we will go round and round in circles. We should wait for the fine print. But just final comment from you, Ambassador, on India-Russia relations in this churning world.
No, let me tell you also a bit about the Indo-Pacific that they were talking about.
The Intergovernmental Commission
we are
on
getting it from
military and military.
No, I doubt it will keep buffering. So we'll just keep playing these pictures and you complete your thought and then we'll end, Ambassador.
Yeah. Actually about the Indo-Pacific, the Foreign Minister Lavrov has been particularly acerbic on this subject, but you must note that in the recent press conference that he gave after the 2+2, he scrupulously avoided criticizing India's position on the Quad. He, in fact, didn't even mention the Quad. He talked about AUKUS. He talked about how AUKUS may upset the military balance in the region. And he did say that India has shown understanding that India has a different position from the US. But you see what President Putin has been saying. You see, in Russia also there are different strands of views on the subject. So you have the Valdai Club and an entire set of academics around President Putin who have been writing about the Indo-Pacific in very different terms, in showing greater understanding for India's perspectives on the Indo-Pacific. And that is why, as I said, the national security strategy of Russia, which President Putin signed recently, does specifically mention, though it doesn't say Indo-Pacific, it talks about working with India for regional stability in the Asia-Pacific, which is as close to convergence on Indo-Pacific as you can ever get, as you have got so far with Russia. So anyway, the fact of the matter, therefore, is, if you want to round up this discussion, the fact is that we have a number of strategic convergences. These strategic convergences will remain, but we cannot, we have to put them in a different basket from the strategic convergences we have with the US. Both are important relationships. Both have to be progressed in areas where we find mutual benefit, and we need to be able to pursue each relationship without harming the other relationship. And each relationship will flourish as long as they do not step on our vital national interests. I think that's the way we need to look at Russia. That's the way we need to look at US.
Ambassador Raghavan, absolute pleasure again for you to share your experience and expertise. And thanks for staying on much longer while we tried out your and all our viewers' patience trying to get you that live press conference. I guess you can read about the joint statement as and when it comes out. But thanks to all our viewers, and thanks Ambassador Trenin. Thanks to our earlier guests as well, Dr. Trenin, Ambassador Raghavan, and Dr. Kireeva. Just a reminder, if you already follow us on our social media handles and subscribe to our YouTube channel, do help spread the word as we try and get to that 100,000 subscriber mark. And if you're a new viewer, welcome, and do check out the mosaic of our work on both our website and YouTube. You've been watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi. Big shout out also to our production team that has brought this longish discussion to you.